Hello YouTube. So I'm coming to you live on Christmas Day with the beginning of what I hope is going to be a long series of reviews of various different races for the Within the Ring of Fire role-playing game, which if you know anything about my videos, I'm very much into. So, appropriately enough, on Christmas, what species am I going to start with? Well, I'm going to start with the living embodiments of hope and empathy and goodwill towards other men. And this is the Hibben. So, recently got this. Actually, this was a Christmas present to myself. I got it appropriately just yesterday. So let's get talking about the Hibben. What are they? And whenever we start with one of these species, we need to go back to when they were first created. Who created them, and what are they all about? Because that really, who created them really tells you a lot about a species. And these, the Hibben, were created by the goddess Ishmi. And Ishmi was the goddess of empathy and hope. And when she created the Hibben, she took owl feathers and she took the essence of dream itself and hope and infused it all together on a dark cloud-covered night. And she created the Hibben. So, when they were first created, they lived for a long time. They lived in a nice environment. However, on the first cycle, Ishmi tragically was murdered by the goddess Lopdif. And Lopdif is the goddess of lies. And she murdered Ishmi. And these people who once were nomads who crossed this great area on the northern continent, this area of fertile farmland and rivers and rolling grasslands and hills, this once lush area, they looked to the sky and saw their goddess dying. Her blood rained down on the earth, and her bones and all her body itself fell to the face of Damar. These people, they were truly tested at this time. Those who were there in their ancestral homeland, this area, were horribly corrupted by this blood that fell for 68 days straight. It turned the very land, it corrupted the very land and all the animals and plants that lived upon it. Those that did not die immediately became what would become eventually the goblins, another horrible species that seeks out the Hibben to kill them at any chance they get, for the horrendous life that these foul creatures now live. But moving on from then, they were scattered to the four winds, scattered across the face of Kvegathale to live in the lands of others, to live at their mercy. And they have never, it has been 5,000 cycles since these creatures, since their goddess was horribly murdered. And these creatures have never recovered. In fact, they have gone into decline since then. But let's talk about, what are the Hibbens? What are they like? Well, these creatures, there's a fantastic, the first thing I can say is that this is a fantastic portrait that was done of a Hibben. And this is what really drew me to the Hibben to begin with, was this fantastic picture. I'll give you a nice good glance we have there. Hibbens are anthropomorphic owl creatures that have these very bright eyes that are almost sort of a neon sort of colors, bright green or bright yellow. They really stand out. That's the first thing you would notice about a Hibben. But they're these short, sort of rotund, sort of fey creatures, because as they were woven of dream from opiate. they are one of the Fae, so they do not engage in. They only engage in a trance. They don't actually sleep, and they only engage in a trance for 2 hours a day. So that's part of what they are, but as they are feathered and they have these bright, usually very bright colors, feathers. They're very personality-wise, they are they're one of the most sympathetic creatures. They're very they're very gregarious and talkative, curious about other cultures, eager to make themselves at home in other cultures. They're also the two biggest things about them, though, is that they are stubbornly hopeful and very self-reliant. They don't like to depend on others, but they so these, and the other thing about them is that because they are born of a goddess who was the goddess of empathy, they have a really hard time hurting other creatures or engaging in violence. They don't easily anger, and killing is absolutely abhorrent to these creatures. Having to kill another sapient being is an absolute last resort for a Hibben. For them, they feel that they have a strong belief that to kill another being is to take away its hope. That is the last. I imagine that these creatures don't very much like Tehul or deal much with Tehul, as for them, death is the end of hope, and they cannot give up that hope. That hope is what they are. They are the embodiment of it, and that is what makes these creatures, one of the things that makes them so sympathetic, is although there are so few of them left, the last one will still be out there struggling, fighting the good fight to stay alive and to bring hope to the face of Kvegathale. For Kvegathale has very little hope in this day and age. In Cycle 5000, there is not much hope left on Kvegathale amongst many peoples. So, other things about, some brief things I can say about the Hibben. Ever since their goddess was murdered, they have flocked to, so to speak, no pun intended, to other goddesses. Rishara, who was the best friend of Ishmi, has now taken them under her wing and sort of been their patron, been the ones to protect them. But also Array, who is the goddess who draws the dead god, the dead sun god Ahura Mazda across the sky. She is now the embodiment. She is the last embodiment of hope left on Kvegathale. So many also flock to her as well. They are also, these people are great cooks. They enjoy eating, especially cheese and other cooked foods like breads. So, and they're very good at doing so. So they also flock as well to Dista as well. And Opiate, almost their grandfather divinity, the grandfather almost of them. You could almost say. So. Now, however, as I said, there are very few left. These creatures, at least in my eyes, are very, very vulnerable species. There are only about 10 to 12,000 of these creatures left. And if you think about it, with humanity, we once got down to about 10,000, but we were very, very close to going extinct ourselves. So you can imagine these creatures are on the brink of tipping over the edge to go to total extinction. And the fact of the matter is that they're scattered across the world. These people once traveled in these large bands across the rolling hills, herding animals, but now they are scattered across the world. So I do not, it is my personal belief that these creatures may not live for very many more cycles. There might not be very many left. When other people see these creatures, they have no idea what they are because there's so few of them around. So, now that I talked a little bit about them, I wanted to give you some of my thoughts about how I would incorporate them into my saga, and maybe even some character ideas to kind of throw at you that could help you when you're using Hibben. So, first thing is, how did these people live? Because it doesn't really, in the book, it's actually, the Hibben are actually one of the shortest entries in the book. They have a very, very short, only about like, about a page and a half is devoted to the Hibbens, which is not very much. Most of them have, the sections on the races are usually very large in this book, but in this case, it's actually fairly short. And I think the reason is because their culture is basically non-existent now. There's so few of them left in communities. There's so few communities of Hibben left that they have no real culture left. Almost like the Native Americans when they got integrated into Western society, you could almost say. Except imagine they didn't have the reservations; they were just spread across all of America and North America, and they just don't have much left for a culture. So I imagined that before this time they were a very, very close society. They traveled in these large groups that were very closely knit, as they are very empathetic with each other, and they rely, because they believe in so much self-reliance. They need the help of other people who are empathetic. And now that they've been scattered, they've been thrown across, they're very vulnerable. These creatures are slow. They don't tend to engage in violence. So I imagine that they tend, nowadays, that there's so many creatures that would eat them, that they'd be so vulnerable to being eaten by Nihangi or ogres. They just, it's no wonder that they are dramatically decreasing in population. They don't have that sort of community to protect them any longer. Also, my other thought is, how do they now cope with this? Their goddess dying must have been a horribly traumatic thing that has resonated through the psyche and what remains of their culture throughout all of these Hibben. And I imagine that most of them still hold on to this hope. But let's think about some darker paths that a Hibben can go across. Because for the most part, they're portrayed as actually, they're one of the most sympathetic creatures in the book. They tend to be definitely leaning more towards the light. They tend to be the good creatures more often than not. However, I can see a couple ways that they could go down a darker path. For one, there are probably some Hibben out there, especially the ones that worship opiate, who have, honestly, they've given up most. They might not. They put themselves into a state of denial where they deny the physical world and are now completely consumed in the dream. That the dream world is now all that they have left. They don't like to visit the real world because it reminds them of their dead goddess and the things that they have lost, everything they have lost, and all this hopelessness and despair. It's got to get to them after a while. So I imagine that there's quite a few of them who have gone into denial, like things have not changed. I'm going to live in now a dream world. And that's kind of, I think, where some Hibben have gone. And that's kind of a darker path, almost like, shutting out the world around them. Another one is, I think some Hibben, a Hibben who has somehow snapped, like just, they're mentally destroyed. Something really, something where they have lost all hope and gone completely the other way. I imagine there's some that might, there might be a cult of Ahriman, the Lord of Darkness, who, wishes to destroy the world and make it perfect. I imagine that there are some who now, go towards him, as they've just seen all this horrible stuff happen, and they just want to just break it all down and recreate it. I imagine there's also Hibben that are like that. That'd be also another interesting idea with the Hibben. So now I'm going to give my review, what I think of the Hibben. So first of all, I can say portrait, love the portrait. It's one of my favorite of the actual drawings in the book. Love the portrait of the Hibben. I maybe wish that the section on the Hibben was a little bit longer, but I can understand why it wouldn't be, because again, there's not very many left. Their culture's been essentially destroyed. But these creatures are very interesting to me. This light, these are sympathetic creatures, and honestly, most of the creatures in here, they do have sympathy, but these are one of the light and the darkness sort of creatures, and it would be interesting to play a creature like that. You know, when all the other player characters are eating each other, eating other other races. You know, the Hibben, you know, are there to kind of be the voice of sanity in an insane world. But I really like them. One little complaint I would say about them too is I didn't understand one of the decisions that was made when kind of they were statted out a little bit. You know, he's kind of, you know, he talks about how their eyesight is much better than most creatures. However, they can't see in the dark, and that kind of surprises me, because the fact that they were created at night and the fact that they are, you know, they're anthropomorphic owls, and owls are nocturnal, and it doesn't really seem like the Hibben are at all nocturnal. That was a little bit confusing to me. I would just be interested to see what the reason was behind that. But otherwise, I really like the Hibben. They're a great entry. I guess if I have to give them a score, I'd give them a 9 out of 10. They're very interesting to me. I'd love to play one eventually. They're one of my bucket list characters. So yeah, just leave any comments or questions you might have for me. I can answer some of them. If you haven't already purchased Monsters and Men, absolutely do so. There are so many base creatures that are added to this that are fully playable, and the Hibben are one of them. Definitely go check it out. This has been Andrew, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye.